Sometimes life gives you a moment that feels like a breaking point, but what you don't see is that it's actually your turning point. This isn't about him anymore. It's about you reclaiming your peace, your confidence, and your sense of worth. Because the moment you choose yourself fully, unapologetically, everything that once hurt you starts losing its power. You're not here to chase, you're here to rise. When someone leaves your life, whether by choice, by distance, or by neglect, you finally gain the clarity that was impossible to access while you were emotionally invested. His absence becomes a mirror you didn't know you needed. It reflects back the effort you were putting in and the effort he wasn't. It shows you the emotional load you were carrying that he rarely acknowledged. Because when someone is physically or emotionally present, even inconsistently, your heart keeps trying to fill in the gaps. You explain away their behavior, you compensate for their shortcomings, you hold on to potential instead of reality. But the moment he steps out of your life, that illusion loses its power. You begin to see, not what he was, but what he wasn't. You notice that you were the one initiating conversations most of the time. You were the one planning, supporting, showing up with your heart open. You realize the bar you accepted was low, not because you deserved less, but because you were trying to make something work with someone who was giving you crumbs. And when the crumbs disappear, something powerful happens. You realize just how little they actually were. You notice the silence not because you miss him, but because it feels strangely lighter. There's no waiting, no wondering, no decoding mixed signals or trying to interpret his moods. The absence reveals the truth. You were living in emotional scarcity disguised as love. And with that awareness comes a deep shift. You stop romanticizing what he represented. You stop replaying the moments where he showed up just enough to keep you attached. Instead, you start to see the imbalance. You recognize that the energy you poured into trying to get him to value you is the same energy you can now redirect into yourself. His absence becomes the detox your heart needed, not to forget him, but to return to yourself. Before, your emotions were tangled with hope, fear, attachment, and expectation. Now there's space to breathe, space to think without being manipulated by his inconsistency. Space to see the version of you that disappeared while trying to hold the connection together. You also begin to understand something crucial. His lack of effort was never a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of his capacity, and capacity is not something you can force, inspire, or fix. You can be the most loving, loyal, emotionally intelligent person in the world, but if he isn't ready, willing, or capable of matching you, the relationship will always feel one-sided. When he's gone, that truth becomes undeniable. You no longer have to negotiate with his avoidance. You don't have to shrink your needs to make him comfortable. You don't have to pretend that silence, indifference, or emotional distance is normal. His absence stops giving you hope and starts giving you perspective. Slowly, you realize you didn't lose something valuable, you lost something draining. You didn't lose the love of your life. You lost the idea of what he could have been. And that distinction frees you, because once you understand that, you stop asking, "Why wasn't I enough?" And you start asking, "Why was I settling?" His absence isn't just a void, it's a revelation. It shows you the strength you forgot you had, the peace you never experienced around him, and the emotional generosity you were giving to someone who couldn't meet you where you stood. And as this clarity grows, something else shifts, the longing fades, the attachment loosens. You begin to move from heartbreak to acceptance, from acceptance to detachment, and from detachment to self-respect. You no longer need closure. You no longer crave explanation, because you understand the truth. What he wasn't giving was never yours to fix. His absence finally makes visible what his presence kept hidden, your own worth. Your silence becomes a kind of truth he can't hide from. Because when you stop feeding someone your presence, your reassurance, your constant emotional availability, they are left alone with the reality of what they contributed and what they never did. When you were there, he didn't have to confront the emptiness he carried. You filled the space with your warmth, your words, your effort. You softened the rough edges of the connection. You bridged every distance. You made excuses for his behavior, and you kept the relationship alive even when he wasn't doing the work to match you. But when you go quiet, not out of spite, not to manipulate, but because you simply stop pouring into something that depleted you, he finally has to confront the truth he ignored while you were trying. Silence isn't just the absence of words, it's the absence of comfort, it's the absence of validation. It's the absence of the emotional safety net he took for granted. Suddenly, there's no one checking in, no one making him feel chosen, no one reminding him he matters. And when someone has relied on your emotional labor without ever acknowledging it, your silence hits like a void they can't fill with distractions or temporary attention from others. For the first time, he feels the weight of your energy by noticing what life feels like without it. In your silence, he begins to feel the consequences of his own behavior. Every time he chose inconsistency, every time he avoided vulnerability, every time he expected you to tolerate the bare minimum, it all echoes back to him. Because your silence isn't loud, but it's undeniable, it forces him to remember that you weren't just a presence, you were the emotional backbone of the connection. And without you, everything feels strangely flat. Conversations with others don't feel the same. Attention from others feels shallow. The ease he once had when you were always there turns into restlessness, irritation, and a gnawing sense that something meaningful slipped away. But what matters most is what your silence does for you. It gives you your power back. When you stop explaining yourself, stop chasing clarity, stop trying to convince someone to value you, you return to your emotional center. You stop leaking energy into a place where it wasn't respected. You start to notice how peaceful your life becomes without constant uncertainty. Your mind begins to settle. Your heart stops bracing for disappointment. You rediscover your own pace instead of emotionally babysitting someone who wasn't giving their best. The beauty of silence is that it opens space for alignment. You begin hearing yourself again, your needs, your intuition, your desires, your boundaries. You start recognizing the difference between love and attachment, between longing and loneliness, between effort and overextending. You begin to understand how much emotional weight you are carrying because the quiet feels lighter than the connection ever did. This clarity doesn't come when you're still entangled with someone who drains you. It comes when you step back and stop participating in your own depletion. And while you're healing, evolving, and stepping into your worth, he starts replaying the moments he overlooked. The conversations he brushed off, the affection he didn't return, the support he didn't appreciate. Your silence becomes the contrast that reveals your value, not because silence is a strategy, but because it's a truth teller. When you remove your presence, he finally sees everything your presence used to provide. Your silence is not punishment, it's protection. It's you choosing peace over chaos, self-respect over chasing, clarity over confusion. And in that decision, he finally feels what he couldn't understand before. You weren't just someone in his life. You were the irreplaceable energy that made his life feel fuller. And now, without you, he has to learn that lesson the hard way. The way you live your life after a relationship ends speaks far louder than any conversation, confrontation, or social media post ever could. When you focus on upgrading yourself quietly, on building a life that excites you, on chasing goals, passions, and dreams, the impact is undeniable. This is the essence of true power. It doesn't shout, it radiates. Men often take presence and effort for granted when they're available without question. They assume that your attention, your energy, and your patience will always be there. But the moment you stop making yourself available and instead redirect your energy into your own growth, everything shifts. Your life becomes a living statement of your value, and he is left witnessing it from the sidelines. Upgrading your life quietly is not about revenge. It is not about showing him that you've moved on, posting for validation, or making him jealous. It's about becoming someone who can no longer be diminished by someone else's lack of effort. It's about reclaiming your energy, your time, and your focus. As you invest in yourself learning, exploring, creating, and connecting, you naturally become magnetic. The joy, confidence, and fulfillment that come from this type of growth cannot be faked, and they are impossible to ignore. He starts noticing, without you having to say a word, that the woman he underestimated is thriving, and that realization is uncomfortable for him in ways he may not understand. This quiet transformation also shifts the balance of power. While he may have once had control over your emotions and your attention, that influence fades when you reclaim it for yourself. The things he once took for granted, your patience, your care, your loyalty, are no longer accessible to him. You no longer negotiate your peace to accommodate his inconsistency. You no longer tolerate the bare minimum. Every accomplishment, every boundary, every joyful moment in your life becomes a testament to your self-worth. And because he can't influence it, manipulate it, or diminish it, he starts to feel the absence of the version of you that once prioritized him over yourself. Another subtle but profound effect of this growth is that it makes him confront the reality of his own choices. He begins to reflect, consciously or unconsciously, on the moments he didn't show up, the times he dismissed your effort, and the opportunities he squandered. He realizes that your life was full of energy, attention, and love, and that those were not just gestures. They were foundations of a connection he failed to nurture. Seeing you thriving in his absence forces him to reckon with the truth that he was never the center of your world. You are always fully capable of being the center of your own. The process of upgrading yourself quietly also benefits you in ways beyond his perception. You rebuild your confidence, rediscover your passions, and cultivate joy that doesn't depend on external validation. You learn to thrive in your own company and embrace experiences that fulfill you independently. You stop shrinking to accommodate someone else's limitations and start expanding to reflect your own potential. This is the kind of transformation that makes peace, happiness, and self-respect irresistible, not just to him, but to everyone in your life. You are no longer defined by a relationship that didn't serve you. You are defined by the life you choose to create. Ultimately, your quiet evolution becomes both a mirror and a statement. It reflects everything he ignored, dismissed, or failed to appreciate, and it communicates without words that your worth was never contingent on his recognition. He sees it, he feels it, and he cannot escape it. Watching you thrive in a way that he never contributed to, never supported, and never valued creates an undeniable sense of regret. And the irony is that regret is not manufactured. It is a natural consequence of him observing your growth, your independence, and your unapologetic commitment to yourself. Your life becomes the proof that you were always more than he realized, and now, without him, you are everything you were always meant to be. When someone fails to recognize your worth, it can be tempting to try and convince them, through words, explanations, or demonstrations of love, that you are valuable, deserving, and irreplaceable. But the truth is, worth is not something you prove, it is something you embody. Your value is revealed through the way you carry yourself, the standards you set, and the way you live your life. When you stop trying to justify your presence, stop negotiating your peace, and stop giving someone access they never truly earned, you communicate more than any argument ever could. This is the kind of quiet power that leaves a lasting impression because it's rooted in authenticity, self-respect, and boundaries. Your worth is shown most clearly through boundaries. When someone consistently disrespects, undervalues, or takes advantage of you, enforcing limits isn't about punishment. It's about clarity. By refusing to tolerate behavior that doesn't align with your standards, you immediately communicate that your love, your time, and your energy are not up for grabs. You no longer allow inconsistency, neglect, or indifference to define your experience. Each boundary you uphold signals to him and to yourself that you are not negotiable. You don't need to explain why. Your actions speak for themselves, and the absence he now feels is a reflection of what he ignored, dismissed, or failed to nurture. The beauty of demonstrating your worth this way is that it is subtle yet undeniable. You don't need to confront him with accusations, long messages, or public posts. You simply continue living in alignment with your values, showing up for yourself first, and refusing to participate in a dynamic that undermines your sense of self. Men sense this energy. They may not consciously articulate it, but they feel the difference between someone who tolerates mistreatment and someone who honors their own standards. That shift in energy communicates more clearly than any explanation ever could. It reflects strength, confidence, and the unwillingness to compromise on what truly matters. Living in alignment with your worth also protects you. When you stop seeking validation from someone who doesn't value you, you reclaim control over your emotions and your energy. You no longer allow their behavior to dictate your mood or self-perception. You start prioritizing your own peace and happiness, understanding that your emotional resources are precious and should be invested where they are respected and reciprocated. In doing so, you create a life that is not dependent on his recognition, attention, or approval, and that independence is a powerful demonstration of your true value. Your presence becomes the ultimate mirror. When he sees that you are no longer compromising your standards, that you are no longer available to be treated as an option, and that your life is moving forward without him, he is forced to confront the reality of what he lost. The subtle shifts, your confidence, the clarity in your decisions, the boundaries you maintain communicate the truth of your worth in a way that words never could. Every choice you make that honors yourself becomes a reminder of what he failed to appreciate, and that absence becomes a quiet echo of regret in his mind. Ultimately, showing your worth through actions rather than explanations is a form of liberation. It allows you to reclaim your power, protect your emotional space, and live a life that reflects your true value. And in doing so, he begins to see what he once took for granted. You were never just present for him, you were extraordinary, and your absence now highlights the opportunity he lost. The impact of living in alignment with your worth is profound because it leaves a lasting impression without drama, without words, and without the need for validation. Your life becomes the statement, and that statement is unforgettable. One of the most liberating shifts you can make after a relationship is to stop focusing on what he did wrong and start focusing entirely on what you can create for yourself. For far too long, many women expend their energy trying to manage someone else's feelings, choices, and inconsistencies, believing that if they just tried harder, loved more, or explained themselves better, the dynamic would change. But the truth is, you cannot fix someone else's inability to see your value. What you can do is redirect that same energy into your own life, into building a world where your worth is undeniable, where your joy is independent, and where your peace is non-negotiable. When you focus on yourself instead of his failures, everything changes not because he notices immediately, but because the transformation becomes impossible to ignore. Prioritizing your own growth means embracing a life that reflects your highest standards, your passions, and your ambitions. It's about stepping into experiences that excite you, relationships that nourish you, and environments that allow you to flourish. Every moment you invest in yourself, whether it's pursuing a career goal, traveling, learning a new skill, or simply enjoying quiet moments of self-reflection, becomes a declaration of independence. You stop shrinking to accommodate someone else's limitations. You stop waiting for validation that may never come. You stop centering your world around someone who failed to see your full value, and as you step into this version of yourself, he begins to feel the absence of the woman he once underestimated. This shift is powerful because it removes the emotional leverage he once had. When you were available, present, and forgiving, he could take your energy for granted without consequence. But when you redirect your attention to your own life, that dynamic disappears. Your absence from his emotional orbit is a natural boundary that communicates far more than words ever could. Every choice you make to prioritize yourself, every boundary you uphold, every moment of joy you cultivate independently serves as a reminder that your life is no longer negotiable for someone who failed to appreciate it. That realization is difficult for him because it exposes the truth of what he lost while giving nothing in return. At the same time, focusing on yourself cultivates resilience and clarity. When your life is filled with experiences, accomplishments, and meaningful connections, you no longer define your happiness based on whether he notices or regrets his actions. You stop replaying past conversations, analyzing messages, or wondering if things could have been different. Instead, your focus shifts outward and inward simultaneously. You build, you explore, you create, and you honor your own standards. The woman he once overlooked becomes impossible to ignore, not because she seeks attention, but because she embodies self-respect, fulfillment, and strength. And that is a far more effective demonstration of worth than any confrontation or explanation ever could be. There's also a subtle psychological effect that occurs when you live this way. He begins to replay the moments he failed to value. The times he ignored your effort, the times he underestimated your patience, the moments he assumed your love would always be there. Suddenly they stand out starkly against the life you are building. Without him, your growth acts as a mirror, reflecting everything he took for granted. The more radiant, confident, and independent you become, the sharper the contrast between what he had and what he will never have again. That contrast creates a sense of regret that is deep, unavoidable, and long-lasting. Ultimately, focusing on yourself transforms your absence into presence, the presence of your worth, your joy, and your independence. You stop chasing him, stop negotiating for his attention, and stop trying to explain the love and value he failed to recognize. Instead, you live fully, unapologetically, and authentically, creating a life that he cannot influence, control, or diminish. In doing so, he finally understands, in the quietest and most undeniable way, that you were everything he needed, everything he overlooked, and everything he will never have again. Your life becomes the proof, and that proof speaks louder than words ever could. Peace is one of the most powerful tools a woman can wield, and it is often the hardest to cultivate because it requires complete self-trust, emotional clarity, and detachment from outcomes that are no longer yours to control. True peace is not about suppressing emotions or pretending nothing hurts. It is about reclaiming your inner stability, your sense of self-worth, and your calm regardless of what someone else chooses or fails to choose. When you reach this level of serenity, you no longer react to his behavior, you no longer chase validation, and you no longer allow his presence or absence to dictate your emotional state. That calm, quiet power becomes an undeniable statement, one that communicates more effectively than words, confrontations, or social media posts ever could. Peace hits hardest because it removes his leverage. While he may have relied on your reactions, your emotional labor, or your attempts to explain yourself, peace requires none of that. When you stop engaging in the cycles of argument, pleading, or explanation, you deny him the control he once had over your emotions. You stop reacting to inconsistency, you stop trying to fill gaps he neglected, and you stop shrinking your needs to accommodate his limitations. Instead, you focus on yourself, your boundaries, and your happiness. That shift is felt acutely by someone who underestimated you because they suddenly notice what they lost not in grand gestures, but in the subtle absence of influence and control. The impact of cultivating peace extends far beyond him. It transforms you. By prioritizing your emotional well-being, you build resilience, confidence, and clarity. You no longer wait for recognition or validation because your value is no longer dependent on his perspective. You reclaim time, energy, and focus for yourself, and you discover how fulfilling life can be when it is lived on your own terms. In doing so, you also create a presence that cannot be ignored. Your calm, joy, and stability naturally draw attention, admiration, and even envy, but these reactions are irrelevant to you because your peace is self-contained. It is a product of your alignment with your own worth, not of his recognition of it. Your absence from the drama, the chaos, and the emotional instability becomes the message. Every choice you make to honor your standards communicates that you are no longer available to be manipulated, underestimated, or overlooked. You are untouchable, not because you are inaccessible in a literal sense, but because your life, your energy, and your happiness are no longer contingent on him. That reality forces him to confront the consequences of his choices in the quietest, most unavoidable way. He may try to provoke a reaction or seek attention, but peace is impervious to manipulation. The calm is unshakable, the confidence unmovable, and the fulfillment undeniable. What makes this form of power extraordinary is that it is entirely self-sustained. You are no longer dependent on external approval, and you are no longer negotiating for validation. You are fully present for yourself, fully aligned with your values, and fully committed to your own growth. Every achievement, every joyful moment, and every step forward reinforces your worth without needing to prove anything to him. And because he is witnessing it from the outside, he begins to feel the weight of absence, the absence of your energy, your attention, and your unwavering presence. He senses the void he created, the opportunities he ignored, and the love he failed to value, but he has no way to reclaim it. Ultimately, cultivating peace is not about revenge or making him feel regret intentionally. It is about reclaiming your life and your emotional sovereignty. And the truth is, nothing destroys a man's sense of certainty, control, or ego faster than the realization that the woman he underestimated is thriving, calm, and untouchable, not through anger, confrontation, or games, but through the quiet, undeniable force of her own peace. That serenity becomes the echo of everything he lost, and it is far more devastating than any words could ever be. At the end of the day, forgetting his presence isn't about erasing memories or seeking revenge. It's about reclaiming yourself. When you focus on your growth, your peace, and your happiness, your absence becomes a force he cannot ignore. He realizes too late that you were everything he needed, and that the life, love, and energy he took for granted are gone. Your strength, your calm, and your unapologetic self-worth speak louder than any words, leaving him to face the quiet but undeniable truth. He lost someone extraordinary, and that loss will echo in his regret forever.